I was just going to hand it over to you and let you know you can begin whenever you wish.
Awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you, Convey UX, for this opportunity to share my experience with you all. So to get started, again, thank you everyone for joining this session. So yeah, welcome to this session about designing for highly technical domains, where we will unpack the unique challenges that come with designing in these areas and some practical takeaways that will help you feel more comfortable in your journey as a designer working in these spaces. But first, like a little bit context about my journey as a designer and why I'm talking to you about this today. So I started my journey in design as an architect, learning about building construction and interior design. But since then, I've spent the last several years working on various technical and non-technical domains, such as financial services and at Bloomberg, data visualization at Tableau, network security at Juniper, delivery experience at Amazon, and most currently, I've been leading design for machine learning at Databricks. And in all of my experiences designing for these domains, they have been extremely rewarding. And I found that every change that I've been able to make to these systems, it has improved the lives of people manifold, right? However, as you probably all can agree, or you're here to listen to this, is that the journey in designing for these highly technical domains isn't always that easy. And when I see this, like the reason is that you can feel that you're always in a continuous state of discomfort, right? Like, especially when you've just joined a new team, you're working on an entirely new, highly technical domain, and are expected to start designing experiences for users right away, right? You're constantly being bombarded with loads of terms that you have no idea about. And you have little idea about how your users actually use the product or their ideal workflows. And on top of that, like over all of this, you're also trying to build relationships with your stakeholders who probably not worked with designers before, right? So it can certainly feel like a lot initially, and it's definitely a lot to work through when you're working in these domains, and especially when you're new. And on top of, again, all of this, now that most of us are working remotely, or at least in hybrid environments, it can be hard to just turn your head around, turn your chair, and ask someone a question. And so your onboarding processes can also be very slowed down. And so how do you, as a designer, approach working in this domain and harness the incredibly rewarding experience that it can really be in working in these highly complex domains? So that's going to be the focus of today's talk, where first we will talk about how do we define complexity, right? Like, what are the parameters that make something complex? Let's try to understand that from first principles. Then we'll understand how can you ramp up on the domain of these highly complex domains. Well, I'll share with you some strategies that I've found to work very well when you're trying to learn a new domain quickly. And the other thing is, like, this aspect of understanding the domain is probably the biggest hurdle or roadblock that you'll need to cross as a designer, without which it can be very hard to do truly impactful work and operate at a more strategic level as a designer. We'll also then cover some discovery practices that I've found worked really well, especially when you have limited access to users. Later, we'll look at some design patterns that apply to a lot of these complex spaces that you can leverage, and some pitfalls that you can avoid. And lastly, towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about how do you manage working with technical stakeholders and build good communication practices with them. So we have a lot of ground to cover. So yeah, let's get started. So we all know when we see a complex application, right? Like example, tools like Tableau for visualizing data, or Alberton for music creation, or a tool like Blender for designing in 3D. But what makes something complex, right? It's a fundamental question. And I think it can be hard to find the vocabulary to define what are the characteristics that make something complex. How do we even define that? And I was looking up about this and I was researching about this, and I found that Nielsen Norman actually has done a lot of research around this definition. And the way they describe complex applications are that complex applications are usually ones that operate in specialized domains that require specialized or technical knowledge by users, which can often take a long time to develop, right? So users are generally doing specialized tasks, and what they're interested in is that usually you'll find users having very broad goals and not a single happy path, but rather several non-linear workflows to achieve something. So example, you're a 3D artist and you're trying to build a 3D model of a house in Blender. You might go about doing this task in various different ways, right? There's no set path by which you might be able to achieve that. And it all depends it can all come in a different variety of order and depending on a lot of different factors. But if you compare this workflow to someone who is shopping for socks on Amazon, right? Like they go in on the app and they search for something, and they will go through a specific workflow to add it to their cart and then go to checkout. So as you can imagine, it can be very hard for someone that you don't, it can be very hard to design for someone and something that you don't understand in the first place. And so that is why learning and understanding the domain you're designing for becomes very important. But the reality is that for most of us, learning the domain can feel like flying a plane while you're learning how to fly it. You're trying to ramp up on this vast domain, trying to understand your users and their workflows better, but also are expected to start solving problems for your users right away. So, some common pitfalls that I've seen designers fall into when they're approaching their learning as they are, they're just you're a new hire working on a new domain. The common challenges that I've seen is that one is that it can be very overwhelming and people try to learn a lot of things at once and not trying to find their focus. The other is that a lot of designers I've seen tend to keep their learning only at the surface level. And, they get an overview of things, but don't necessarily do the work to go at the next level of depth, which can, I think, be an impediment for your growth as a designer in that company. The third thing is that I feel is that a lot of designers also always there's this nagging feeling about feeling pressurized that you have to become a domain expert to do good work, which is not true, and we'll talk about that later. And lastly, I've also seen a lot of people waiting for other people in their team or in their organization to help guide their learning path, or quote unquote spoon feed them with domain knowledge, which doesn't usually happen. And you're in charge of designing your own learning path for yourself. So I'll share a little bit of a story here. So when I first joined the machine learning team at Databricks, I joined with absolutely no experience with machine learning. And I remember being super uncomfortable, like an imposter in almost all of the meetings that I went to. I was hearing all these terms, all these terms listed over here on this slide, left, right, and center. And I was expected to start working on 2 to 3 product areas right away, right? So, and just to level set, the bigger circles on this diagram represent the frequency of these terms that I'm hearing, right? So there's tons of these terms that are coming at me, and I'm feeling a lot of pressure that, hey, I need to understand a lot about this domain very quickly because I had a lot of pressure on me to deliver a good experience for the product areas that I was supporting. And again, this was just about the domain, right? I also needed to learn about our users and the product itself, the ecosystem in which our product operates. So how might you even approach your learning in such an overwhelming environment in the first place? So one thing that I've found has worked very well is that, if you stack your learning into like higher level buckets and then build on top of it. So the way I would try to visualize this is that your learning goal should be to build a conceptual high level understanding of the key user workflows in the beginning, right? So focusing on like what are users trying to do in your product, what does success look like for them at a very broad and a higher level understanding. And essentially what I found is in a lot of these complex applications, this high level understanding is very simple in general, and it focuses on these smaller nuggets of concepts which are stitched together. So once you have a good understanding of, hey, like when you're like, for example, for a machine learning engineer who's trying to do machine learning on the Databricks product, what are the various steps that they have to go through, right? Like, and how do they connect to each other? Once you have a good understanding of that, then I think trying it together to the various concepts that you're hearing about, right? So you can layer over, and so like any of these earlier concepts, these words and jargons that you're hearing about, you can then try to categorize them and try to go deeper into, all right, like how do these concepts relate to this particular aspect of this person's workflow, right? So this in general like helps you have a better understanding of how these various things relate to each other. And you can imagine, right, like on top of this initial workflow, you can build on more and more layers on top of it. Like example, your user research findings on the various steps of this user journey, any product opportunities, product ideas, gaps, etc., all over this. And this can be your baseline understanding of, especially initially, right, like how things work. So I think like this is good enough to have an initial understanding, but how, like what mechanisms do you actually use to even get here, right? Like it can be very overwhelming to even try to get to this understanding, and there are a lot of resources available. So where do you even begin? So, it seems pretty obvious to start your journey by taking down notes of all the terms you're hearing about, Googling about all these terms, and even now use ChatGPT, right? Like to ask ChatGPT to explain to you some of these concepts, which can be very powerful as well. And you can also, I ended up like taking a couple of courses online to help build that higher level understanding of like of the machine learning processes or other domains that I've worked in as well, which have been useful. So this seems like a common pathway for most designers. And but where do you go from there, right? Like what are other steps that you can take to help further solidify your understanding across the three pillars, right? Which is the product, the users, as well as the domain. And I found a number of strategies that have worked really well for me and helped me broaden my perspective and help me ramp up on a domain pretty fast. So the first strategy is to play with the product. I can't stress this enough. This has helped me incredibly like ramp up on the domain very fast. So ways you can do this is like, try doing the user's task in the product, following along tutorials. Maybe your company already has some tutorials online or on YouTube, or some competitor has tutorials that you can leverage, and try to play with the product, try to do simple tasks on your product. And that way you'll start to build more muscle memory around how your users are using the product. And it can really be illuminating for you as a designer, and try to put you in your user shoes. At Databricks, there's a concept of CUJs, which stands for critical user journeys, wherein like new hires or anyone who's interested goes through a specific task and tries to do that in the product. And then they document this their experience with the entire company. And that in general has been very illuminating for a lot of folks, especially new folks who have just joined the team, to get an understanding of the product. So as an example, this is the first machine learning model that I created when I joined Databricks. This was like 3 or 4 months after I joined. So I took my sweet time to ramp up and learn about how all of this works. And I still remember how illuminating this process was, right? I was immediately able to see so many product opportunities which would otherwise be so easy to miss. And I remember once I did this process, then documented my entire journey and shared it with the company. And not only it helped, bring to light some of the usability issues that the team was not aware of initially, which by the way, you do not need any domain expertise to be able to spot usability issues as a designer. And the other thing is that this also helped me get more visibility in my cross-functional teams, and I was able to provide them value right away. So this can be a great way to show that you're proactive, you want to learn, and you are willing to share your expertise and show your value very quickly to the team as well. So the other method that I've also seen work very well is, of course, like UX 101, get in touch with users, speak to at least half a dozen users to begin with in your first couple of weeks, and start really trying to understand, ask more generative research questions in general, but also try to understand more about what their day-to-day looks like. What are their bosses' expectations of them? What does success look like for them in this tool? And also try to get an understanding of, in general, how they feel about your product. What opportunities do they think you all can work on? And of course, share out everything that you're learning with your team as well. Another mechanism that I found work very well is building relationships with SMEs. So, and I can't stress this enough, that I found that you need to find your allies within your company. So, example like SMEs who are very passionate about your space and are willing to share feedback, be the voice of customer, and share with you consolidated nuggets. I think this consolidated nuggets of wisdom is the most important thing that you can get out of this relationship. And of course, they benefit from working with you as well, because you are improving the product that they are either selling to other customers or they're using themselves in their job. So try to hone as many relationships with SMEs in your work area. So I remember when I joined this machine learning team, in the first few days itself, I emailed and reached out to almost every SME in the machine learning area. And that really helped us, me and my team, ramp up on this domain faster. Another mechanism that I found work very well is that, and of course, this comes very naturally to us designers, but sometimes it's a good reminder for us to remember to draw stuff out, right? So in meetings or even when you're learning, it helps to greatly clarify your thinking and can also be quite useful in bringing various stakeholders on the same page. So for example, this is a workflow of a specific machine learning training process that I ended up drawing in one of our meetings with my team. This is again the initial few months, which probably saved my team and myself several days of back and forth, because it turned out our team, various engineering members of our team also had different understanding of what this workflow looked like, which was very interesting, because I always thought that, hey, all the engineers on my team probably know how all of this works. But it turned out that was not the case. And a diagram like this really helped clarify and bring everyone on the same page. And of course, it also helped me understand how a user actually goes about doing this particular process. And there's another colleague of mine who ended up creating and mapping out the entire IA of the product and use that to map out the various key user journeys of different users in the product. She did an extensive amount of research on this. And it was a great tool for not only a new person joining this team and trying to understand the various, what are users trying to do in the product, but also it became a very valuable asset that anyone across the company could leverage. And it also helped people understand how various parts of the product related to each other. So again, this exercise helped bring a lot of clarity for various people and also helped aid learning. And lastly, last learning mechanism that I want to share is that regardless of whatever you learn, I think it's very important to share it with other people. I think that one of the best ways to learn is to share your learnings with others, because it's a forcing function for you to make sure that your basics are in order, and it helps eliminate some of the gaps in your learning as well. One thing I also add here is that as you're sharing with others, of course, not only to strengthen your learning, but I think there's another very important aspect to this, which is that not everyone can spend the time in going deep in your domain. And when you start sharing what your learnings are, the more and more you share what you're learning, either by writing blogs, guides, or talks, excuse me, the more cross-pollination of these ideas and knowledge occurs, you'll build more opportunities of collaboration with other designers and PMs across your company. And of course, it also gives you more visibility as a designer. So as an example, like after about 3 months of joining the machine learning team, I, along with 2 other designers, gave an intro to ML presentation to the entire design team. And this got the whole design team interested in machine learning, which which they were previously shy to deep dive into. And finally, I want to wrap up this section by saying that, of course, there will always be something that you don't know about, which will tend to bring to you a state of discomfort. But you need to remember that you don't need to be a domain expert in order to be successful as a designer. Rather, you need to focus on your superpowers in being the voice of the user. And this is where I think, as a designer working in these domains, yes, you need to understand the domain, you need to learn about it, but also you need to double down on your superpowers when you're working in this cross-functional setup. And spend a lot of time in gaining a solid understanding of your users, their motivations, their challenges, and be that connective tissue across the organization and help your teams visualize not only your users' problems and not only like problems to your users, not only your users' problems, but also potential solutions to those problems. So on that note, now that we've spent time learning about how to build a solid foundation for of the domain, what kind of discovery practices can you use to strengthen your understanding of your users? And it's important to discuss this today because one of the big challenges that I've noticed working in a lot of these technical domains is that getting access to users in general is challenging. Why? Because a lot of times, sometimes users can be strapped with time. They can be hard to reach out to because typically there's like a whole sales org involved in the process of selling these applications to users. And it's not as easy as, emailing a specific user and hopping on a call with them or using tools like user testing and sending people links to try out something. So you might have to go through a lot of hoops to actually speak to users. And so I think as designers working in these domains, we have to start to be more resourceful and try to find other means to try to gather information about our users and try to get a better understanding. And one of the things that you'll notice is that a lot of these products, you'll have different types of users using them. So of course, like one of them is the first one is the power users, right? These are the expert users who are evangelists for your product and use your product heavily. And they're most likely to be very enthusiastic about providing feedback. And usually like a lot of times, I think they provide they tend to be more positive than negative about your product. The other type of user is what I call is a professional who uses your product for day-to-day work, but they can be harder to get access to, and they don't have special allegiance to your tool. It's just that it solves a problem for them and they are using it in their work. These are the kind of people who you want to convert to power users, and it can be very important to try to reach out to these users as well, because they'll give you very valuable advice and feedback. And lastly is the novice users. Again, these are domain experts who with that specialized knowledge in your domain, but they haven't used your product as much, and they need help with onboarding. They might have used other products in the past and might be just switching over to your product. So one thing about this is, again, like, try to reach out to different types of users so you get a more rounded perspective. And also try to see what's the mix of users on your platform, and how does it relate to your business strategy. So for example, if you are trying to reach out to a lot of like everyday users in an organization, you need to make sure that you're talking to a lot of professionals and novice users in an organization to be able to get their perspective and not just talk to power users who might be used to a lot of workflows and you might miss some specific feedback from them. The other piece is that in again, all of this, we kind of touched on this earlier as well, is that when you're trying to reach out to users, this is where the relationships that you start building with the SMEs in your organization, with people in professional services, with sales associates or account executives. They're working with customers every day, and they in general have a lot of close relationships with customers, and they can be that resourceful beings who can help connect you with a lot of customers. And I've particularly found that when I have to run some user studies or need to get feedback very quickly on certain topics, I reach out to these people, and instead of reaching out to people that I don't know previously, and it really helps accelerate the user research process. And I think another thing that I also want to point out, that apart from other research activities that you as a UX designer might be doing, because in a lot of cases, a lot of these domains I've seen, not a lot. It might end up being that UX designers end up doing research as well for the teams. I haven't seen a lot of researchers embedded in these teams, unfortunately. So apart from other research activities such as usability testing and more generative research activities, I found that the single most illuminating research activity for me has been observing someone, either a user or an SME, do a particular task. So given a prompt or a problem, observing how someone performs or is trying to solve that problem is extremely illuminating. And it's more grounded in reality rather than more hypothetical scenarios, which can be hard for people to verbalize. And it can be hard to gather insights when it's more in hypothetical scenarios. But when you're actually observing how someone is getting stuck in doing maybe a simple process, or how someone has to frequently context switch between various windows to be able to do a task, it can be very illuminating. However, again, this can be a very time-consuming process. So I would say that try to do this particular research activity, especially when you're initially onboarding, because during that time, usually you have a lot more time on your hands. And it can be, try to record these so you can share with people more broadly and refer back to it later as well. And lastly, I think other research strategies that can be very helpful. Again, because as a UX professional, you want to be a very strong advocate for users, and you want to round your perspective with how your users are using your product. So again, being resourceful here and trying to find various other secondary sources of information as well. So, looking at Jira tickets or bugs or previous research studies or any online forums where people have, like I particularly found Reddit to be very useful, where people, are talking more honestly about how they use your product, etc. And also playing with competitor products. That has been very helpful as well. And finally, I would say, like, you're doing all of these research discovery practices, but it's only as useful if you are able to work with your cross-functional partners to help stack rank these issues, help in prioritization of these issues, and the work to be done. So I would say, like, involve your cross-functional partners as much as you can in these activities. So, you're not just doing the discovery work yourself, but involving them, and so that you're all partners in this process and can help then synthesize these findings and actually use that to plan your product work. So awesome. So now we look at some common design patterns and pattern mistakes that I've seen being used in these various technical domains, regardless of which industry you're working in. So some of the common usability mistakes that I've seen these applications tend to have is that, like things like bad IA or different patterns for doing the same things, bad error states, lack of guidance to complete a task, poor feedback, a lot of context switches, etc. So a lot of these are usability issues. And a lot of times I've also seen that because inherently these workflows or tasks can be complex, the way someone translates that into an application experience can also sometimes be overly complex, or it might just reinvent an already existing workflow that a user is used to in other applications. So I think it's important for us to remember that, hey, these people are not just using this tool, but also a lot of other applications in the day-to-day life, like Gmail or YouTube or all of these other services. And so as much as possible, if we can try to align to these common patterns, it'll make their lives easier. So again, trying to identify these mistakes, you don't need a lot of domain expertise to be able to try to iron out some of these common usability mistakes. And you can, even by doing this, you can greatly improve the experience. And one thing you'll notice is that, and it was an epiphany moment for me a few years ago, which is that a lot of these UX components, there's actually a lot of these reoccurring UX components that or UI components that occur in a lot of these applications. So you'll often find that a lot of these applications are dealing with data, visualizing it, having people sift through a lot of information and try to narrow it down, drill down further, and try to see relationships of various things with each other, etc. Right? So components like tables or filters, dashboards, relationship diagrams, forms, or contextual panels where someone can see more information without going somewhere else, or onboarding. A lot of these patterns are recurring across various parts of your application. And what I found is that a lot of times, especially when in these domains where, again, design might still be young as a discipline, you might not have designers working on every part of the product being developed. And at least this is from practical experience in the last few places that I've worked, is that creating UX guidelines around some of these common occurring UI patterns and components can really help reduce these common usability mistakes that keep occurring in these products. So for example, like even if there's a developer or a PM or someone else working on a smaller part of the product by themselves, they can still reference these guides and still make better UX choices, if not the best, by referencing these guides. And so in your applications, if you can see that, hey, like, oh, like we are observing that, 60 to 70% of the various parts of our application are using dashboards for presenting data, or are using a grid for presenting specific specific data and like further drilling it down, you can focus on these few elements and really try to add more guidelines and guardrails around that experience to help unify the experience and make and give better guidance to the rest of the company. And another thing that I want to add about this is that apart from like once you've figured out you fixed usability issues and you've aligned your app fairly with other common everyday apps that your users use, this is the thing that can really differentiate your product from other experiences, which is helping build delightful workflow accelerators for your users. So what are workflow accelerators? It's basically something that helps someone speed up their work much more than previously. So can you suggest next actions or solutions to the user, or can you help them prevent problems early when they're trying to finish a task, or can you automate something that they had to previously spend a lot of time doing? And the reason is that I think these workflow accelerators can really help users save time and money on their work, and maybe like ultimately get them promoted. So the more you can help users do save on time, money, and ultimately get promoted, the more they will love your product and the more they'll keep coming back and try to use this. So keeping these three things in mind has always helped me. Like, hey, is this saving my user time? Is this saving them money? Or is it helping them achieve better outcomes which make them look good in front of their bosses, right? So keeping these three things in mind really help in helping like make the right product decisions. All right, so now let's cover the last section of this talk, which is about managing stakeholders, right? So this can be this comes with its own unique set of challenges about when you're trying to manage stakeholders, work with them, collaborate with them on creating good experiences for your users. And some of the challenges that come when you're working with stakeholders in these complex domains is that a lot of times these stakeholders might not have experience working with designers before. Or even if they have, they might not be sure when to involve designers or even what they do, right? And sometimes it can be hard to push back when you're making product decisions, especially when you're still new in your understanding of your domain. So you don't have a lot of knowledge armor to kind of fight back and push back. And this is where, again, like the more information, the more knowledge you have about how your users are using the product can really help in being that armor. And finally, I think it can also feel like a harder road to building influence on the team. Again, especially if the team is previously used to working without a designer, right? So again, this can feel very disheartening, and it can be hard and tiring trying to prove your existence on the team, and even it can be challenging for sure. But I think in times like, especially when in moments like this, it's important to remember the purpose of your work and staying close to your users and working towards making their lives easier. And I think what has also helped me is focus on the things that I can control as a designer, which is my mindset, right? So, and what I try to remember is that, hey, the reason I'm doing this is because, one, like, I love what I do, but also remember that everything that I'm doing is actually making the users' lives multiple times better each day. So that gives me immense satisfaction in what I'm doing, and it helps me keep a positive mindset and focus on the things that I can control. So how do you actually go about building better relationships with your stakeholders? So one is that you need to, right from when you start working on these problems or with this new team, you need to start building trust and show value. So tie your outcomes to your company's goals and share out your work as much as possible and as broadly as you can. So, for example, make sure to share out broadly any customer interviews you've done, insights you've gathered, prototypes you've created with Loom videos, etc., to not just to your internal teams, which I think a lot of designers we end up doing anyway, but also your larger orgs and even at the company level sometimes. And share resources on design to the team to help elevate their understanding of how design works or how they should perhaps work with someone as well, with you as well. And also take time to share out your work more broadly at like opportunities like, there are all hands. So try to show up a prototype of a future version of the product you're working in, etc., which can be very powerful. Another thing is, again, try to align as much as with the business. Of course, like apart from the domain, users, and the product, it's very helpful if you understand which area is your business operating in. How does a business make money? Which are the whale customers or the big customers that you're trying to work with? What are their biggest asks? And what are the biggest gaps and opportunities in your platform? What are the competitors doing? So having a rounded understanding of that also really helps you as a designer. And again, we kind of talked about this previously as well, but again, biggest advantage to designers is we can be that horizontal connective tissue across various teams of the product. And again, the more we can demonstrate, the more we can try to bring people together and different teams together, the more valuable we are, and we can help bring value to our stakeholders. And lastly, of course, give feedback to your stakeholders, right? If you feel that you're not being valued or your opinions is not being heard, depending on the maturity of your relationship with that particular stakeholder, you might want to give them feedback, share with them artifacts of what designers produce. I've also seen some designers giving talks about what designers do, how to work with them, what sort of artifacts can you expect, etc., when to involve them in product planning processes, etc., to teams to help educate them as well. So treat it as a two-way street, and give your stakeholders feedback as well. So yeah, we covered a lot of things today. So yeah, I think in general, complex applications usually operate in specialized domains with broad and non-linear workflows. You need to, and as a designer, you need to spend time learning about the domain, users, and your product, but also need to know that you don't need to be a domain expert, and you need to focus on being the voice of the user. And you can go a long way in fixing some common usability issues in the product, but also focus on designing for some workflow accelerators, which can be very useful. And finally, spend a lot of time in building trust, understanding the business, and being a connective tissue for your stakeholders. So with that, that's all, folks. Thank you so much for listening and yeah, being here. Alan, I cannot hear you. I think you're on mute.
Okay, how about now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you see? I was so excited about your talk and how it was so much bigger and broader than the title. It's designing for highly effective technical teams. It's more like contributing, adding value in that highly technical ecosystem, and just some of the tidbits that you shared earlier on. You don't need to be a domain expert to identify usability issues. So start using the product right away, build trust, show value, just how you can contribute during your learning process. So I really appreciated that. We have, I think, less than 1 minute. We may have 20 seconds left. So I don't think there's time for questions. But is there a way people can reach you, Ridhima?
Yes, absolutely. I will share my email in the chat. And there's my email. It's hello@ridhima.me. So if there's any questions people have, happy to have a conversation or discuss about this topic in more detail. Very passionate about it. So please feel free to reach out to me. Apologies, I couldn't leave more time for questions during this session, but really enjoyed talking with you all. And again, thank you so much for listening in.
Thank you, Ridhima. Your content was so deep and rich. I was happy that you kept going until the end. So people can certainly engage with you through other channels. So that wraps up the day of Convey UX. I hope everybody had a good time and found value. Thanks again for Ridhima for her session, and I will see everybody tomorrow. Take care, all.
Great. Thank you. Bye.